We had previously touched upon what appears to be a conflict between Bamidbar 21:8, the instructions that were given to Moshe, and 21:9, the actual implementation by Moshe of those instructions. In the instructions, Moshe was told to form an image of a saraf, while in actuality Moshe created an image of a nachash. And while we could maintain that the two terms saraf and nachash are interchangeable, a careful reading of the text would suggest that the normal term for a snake is nachash, whereas the saraf would describe a venomous serpent, which begs the question as to why Moshe Rabbeinu deviated from the instructions that he was given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. With respect to text interpretation, there are two broad approaches. One approach is to take a very literal reading of the text, that the text is to be taken literally as presented, and therefore, on the assumption that a saraf differs from a nachash, the question will arise as to how come Moshe deviated from the instructions that he was given. The Rebbe, however, allows for a second option with regard to reading of the text, and that is one that is based upon a belief statement that Moshe would never transmit information unless that information came from God. Accordingly, we would need to accept the thesis that not all information is actually recorded in the text. With respect to the conflict between Pasuk 8 and Pasuk 9, the Rebbe suggested that God told Moshe not to aseh lecha saraf, but rather aseh lecha nachash of the saraf species, a nachash that through its bite would cause the person to figuratively saraf, burn with an intense fever and eventually lead to death. With this thesis, we can respond to question number 2, raised earlier. Rashi, in his commentary to Nachash Nechoshet, in which he addresses the question as to why Moshe made a Nachash out of Nechoshet, copper or brass. And in that commentary he writes, Amar Moshe, Kadosh Baruch Hu Kora'o Nachash. God called this species of reptile a Nachash, and therefore I will make this Nachash out of Nechoshet, a play of words. The reality is, God did not call this reptile a Nachash, but rather a Saraf. With the thesis that not all information is recorded in the text, it might be suggested that Moshe was instructed to make a Nachash Saraf, but when the instructions were recorded in the text, the word Nachash was dropped. As evidence to the validity of this thesis, the Rebbe referred us to Bereshit 4:15, where Rashi states very clearly that this, along with many other pasukim throughout the Chumash, is an example how not everything that took place is necessarily recorded by the text. What Rashi mentions in passing, the Ramban elaborates in great detail. Bamidbar 16 records the rebellion of Korach against the leadership of Moshe, accusing him with nepotism. The response to that challenge is recorded in Pasuk Daled, Vayishma Moshe. He hears, understands the thrust of the challenge, and Vayipol al panav, falls upon his face, possibly in exhaustion, in desperation, and also possibly in a prayer for guidance as to how he was to respond. We are not told of any response that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe. Rather, in Pasuk 5, we find that Moshe informs Korach and his congregation, those that joined him in the rebellion, that within the next 24 hours God will indicate which of the Levite families were to be chosen as Kohanim, and sets in place the method through which this information would be conveyed to the people. Zot asu, this is what you must do. Each one of you was to prepare a fire pan with ketoret, with the spices, present them to God. This they dutifully did, along with Aharon. The outcome was the incineration of the 250 people that joined Korach in the rebellion. The glaring difficulty that we face when reading the text is that in the absence of any communication by God as to how to respond, by what authority then did Moshe make the statement that within the next 24 hours, Vayoda Hashem, God will make known which family of the Bnei Levi were to become Kohanim? This is the question that the Ramban raises and suggests that not all information is recorded in the text, that subsequent to Pasuk 4 and prior to Pasuk 5, the instructions that Moshe gave to Korach and his followers, HaKadosh Baruch Hu informs Moshe that he will make known who is right and who is wrong in this challenge, and furthermore, Moshe was to prepare for a trial by the fire pans. The instructions given to Moshe are not recorded in the text. What is recorded is Moshe's implementation of those instructions in Pasuk 5 and 6. In the words of the Ramban, V'yesh Omrim, suggesting that this was an alternative explanation in response to the textual difficulty, Ki vayishma Moshe v'yipal al panav, that Moshe, after hearing about the challenge, falls upon his face in prayer. The content and intent of this prayer was Lidrosh et Hashem, to inquire from HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ladat Ma Ya'aseh, what he was to do. Ba'az Ne'emar Lo, God responded to him that Boker v'yivada Hashem v'gomer, that within the 24 hours the matter was to be resolved. The Ramban goes on to write, V'lo nizkar zeh rak b'siper Moshe la'am. This communication and response by God to Moshe is not recorded in the text. We only know of it when Moshe brings that response to Korach and the congregation. And the Ramban goes on to write, Ukvar hiriticha, I have already noted elsewhere, Ki b'mekomot rabim, that there are many instances that Pam Yarich b'diber Hashem el Moshe. The text elaborates in great detail regarding the communication between God and Moshe, while at the same time v'yikatzer b'sipur Moshe, but abbreviates that communication when recording the transmission of that information to the people. Upam yaseh behepech, sometimes it's the reverse, a short reference of Hashem's communication with Moshe, and a lengthy elaboration with respect to the implementation of that communication. And a third paradigm, sometimes there is no mention whatsoever of, in some cases, the communication to Moshe, and at other times of Moshe conveying that communication to the people.